She was a royal sovereign from a fallen empire of 1,000 dying stars. He was nothing but an underfed, forgotten human stray pulled straight from the toxic gutters of a scrap world. When her throne was stolen, her enemies sent their worst biological nightmares to hunt her down, hulking, razor-spined freaks engineered to tear through reinforced starship armor like wet paper. The hunters expected a terrified, crying alien princess and an incredibly easy meal. Instead, they found a human. And those beasts learn the hardest, most brutal lesson the universe has to offer: when you corner a desperate human stray protecting his mother, you don't get a meal. You get an absolute, unadulterated massacre. The rain fell on the junkyard planet of Tardius like rusted nails. It didn't wash the dirt away, it just turned the metallic ash into a corrosive sludge that could eat through heavy leather boots and bare skin alike. Chance was only 9 years old, but he already knew the rules of the scrapyard better than he knew his own reflection. Rule number 1, keep your head down. Rule number 2, if it shines, it belongs to the local gangs. Rule number 3, and the most important one, never, ever bleed. Blood brought the scovrats, and scovrats brought the larger, uglier things living deep within the shifting junk piles. Chance huddled beneath the hollowed-out chassis of a decommissioned cargo freighter, shivering violently in a ragged coat that was 3 sizes too big. His small hands were completely black with grease, his knuckles cracked and raw from prying copper wire out of frozen conduits all morning. He was hungry, the kind of deep, hollow hunger that made your hands shake and your stomach twist into knots. Just as he pulled a half-eaten, gritty protein bar from his pocket, the sky violently tore open. It wasn't a standard ship descending through transit. It was a violent, uncoordinated rip in the atmosphere. A streak of blinding white light screamed down through the bruised, toxic clouds, moving far too fast. The impact hit the ground just 3 meters away, sending a concussive shockwave that rattled the teeth in Chance's skull. In the scrapyard, a crash meant salvage. Salvage meant credits. And credits meant real food. But as Chance climbed over the jagged dunes of twisted metal to claim the prize, he had no idea he was about to pull something out of the wreckage that would change the fate of the entire galaxy. When Chance reached the smoking crater, the air tasted heavily of ozone and burning plastic. Sitting in the center of the impact zone was an escape pod. This wasn't the boxy, utilitarian junk the local corporate mining freighters used. It was sleek, pearlescent white, and edged in brushed gold, though heavily scarred by its chaotic atmospheric entry. The hatch was blown wide open. Chance crept toward it, a rusted, heavy-duty iron wrench gripped tightly in his small hand, his heart hammering against his ribs. He expected to find a dead corporate executive or a smashed cargo drone. Instead, he found her. She was collapsed in the mud just outside the pod, draped in tattered, scorched fabrics that looked softer than anything Chance had ever seen. She was incredibly tall, even crumpled on the ground. Her skin was a striking, pale lavender mapped with faint bioluminescent veins that pulsed weakly with a soft, silver light. She had high cheekbones, pointed ears that swept back gracefully, and hair the color of spun starlight. She was an alien, but not like the rough, scaly brutes that traded at the local spaceport. She was elegant, majestic, and completely out of place on a trash world. She was also dying. A jagged piece of starship shrapnel was lodged deep in her side, and a pool of deep violet blood was gathering in the corrosive mud beneath her. Rule number 1 screamed in Chance's head: keep your head down and walk away. Getting involved with off-worlders always ended with a blaster hole to the chest. He turned to climb out of the crater, but a sharp, ragged gasp stopped him dead in his tracks. He looked back, and her luminous silver eyes locked onto his. There was no royal arrogance in them, only a desperate, naked terror. It was the exact same look Chance saw every time he looked in the mirror. And right then, the 9-year-old orphan made a choice that defied every rule of survival he had ever learned. Chance slid back down into the mud. "Don't move," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. He knelt beside her, tearing a relatively clean strip of cloth from his oversized coat. "This is going to suck," he muttered, pressing the makeshift bandage hard into her wound. The alien princess let out a strangled cry, her slender lavender fingers digging into the dirt, but Chance held it there with all his meager weight until the violet bleeding finally slowed. He broke off a piece of his precious, grimy protein bar and held it to her lips. "Eat," he ordered. She swallowed the morsel with visible effort, and the silver veins on her neck pulsed a little brighter. "I am Victoria," she whispered, her voice sounding like cracked, musical glass. "I have nothing to give you, child." "Didn't ask for anything," Chance said, helping her stand. "If we stay here, the gangs will find the pod. They'll kill us both." "Can you walk?" "I must," Victoria replied. She was far heavier and denser than her slender frame suggested, but she leaned on his small shoulder, and together. The sovereign of a fallen empire and a human boy with no future limped away into the labyrinth of rusted iron. Over the next few weeks, a strange dynamic settled between them. Chance hid her in an abandoned subterranean maintenance tunnel, smuggling clean water and medical supplies he had to fight for. Victoria healed at an alarming rate, her alien physiology rapidly knitting flesh and bone back together. But more importantly, she didn't treat Chance like a stray dog. When he returned bleeding from fights over scrap metal, she cleaned his wounds with gentle hands. She taught him how to read Galactic standard language, and Chance taught her how to survive, how to walk without making a sound, how to identify toxic rain by smell, and how to hold a knife so it couldn't be twisted back on her. One evening, sitting by a hidden chemical fire, Victoria looked at the boy. "Why did you come back for me, Chance?" Chance poked the glowing embers with a piece of rebar. "Because nobody ever came back for me. Figured it was time to change the rules." Victoria reached out, her pale hand resting gently on his scarred cheek. It was the first time in his life anyone had touched him with genuine affection. "Then we shall change them together," she said softly. "You are my son now, Chance. In the eyes of the stars, and in the blood of House Hastings. Where I go, you go." 10 years is a mere blink in the lifespan of a star, but it is more than enough time to forge a human boy into a dangerous man. The quiet frontier settlement of Oak Haven sat on the edge of the known expanse, a peaceful agrarian colony built into the side of a massive, terraformed canyon. It was the perfect place to completely disappear. Chance was now 19 years old. He was no longer the underfed, scrawny rat of Tardius. The heavy gravity of the fringe worlds, combined with a decade of intense manual labor, had packed thick, dense muscle onto his towering 6'2" frame. He was quiet, broad-shouldered, and worked as a mechanic for the local atmospheric harvesters. Victoria ran a small greenhouse on the edge of town, successfully passing as a rare exotic variant of an aquatic alien species by keeping her glowing veins concealed beneath high collars and long sleeves. They lived a perfectly quiet, unremarkable life. But quiet never lasts. It started with the livestock. A local farmer found his herd of heavy brack beasts completely slaughtered near the canyon ridge. It wasn't a normal predator attack, predators ate what they killed. These massive beasts were simply torn to pieces, their spines snapped and their flesh shredded purely for sport. Chance stood in the pouring rain, staring down at the massive, three-toed footprints pressed deep into the hardened mud. The local sheriff muttered about a rogue wildcat, but Chance knew better. The stride length was bipedal, incredibly heavy, and unnaturally fast. Something terrible had dropped from orbit. As Chance drove his hover truck back to the greenhouse at dangerous speeds, his blood ran entirely cold. He remembered the horror stories Victoria had whispered to him by the fire on Tardius. These tracks belonged to the Imperial Hounds, bioengineered apex predators used by the usurpers of her home world. They were executioners. And if the hounds were here, the hunter was already watching. Chance burst into the greenhouse, finding Victoria calmly pruning a row of luminous blue ferns. "They found us," he said simply. He walked straight to the back of the shed, pulling away a heavy tarp to reveal a locked, heavy military trunk. Victoria dropped her shears, her lavender skin turning completely pale. The hounds. Their three-toed prints are all over the ridge, Chance explained, punching his code into the trunk. It popped open with a sharp hiss of decompressed air, revealing two heavy industrial plasma cutters modified to fire lethal, superheated bursts, alongside a pair of serrated carbon steel machetes. "We need to run," Victoria said, her voice trembling as the regal poise cracked. "Chance, you don't understand. A pack of hounds cannot be fought. They are plated in thick bone armor. They move like shadows." Chance strapped a utility belt around his waist and checked the charge on the modified plasma weapon. "We're not running. We ran for 3 years before we found this place. I'm not giving it up. And I am sure as hell not letting them take you. Mom." The word stopped her dead in her tracks. He rarely used it, reserving it only for moments of absolute gravity. Chance gripped her shoulders with his large, calloused hands. "They sent animals because they think you're alone. They don't know I'm here." Before Victoria could argue, a terrifying sound echoed from the dark canyon. It wasn't a standard animal howl. It was a mechanical, guttural clicking followed by a high-pitched shriek that literally vibrated through the teeth in Chance's skull. It was the sound of a predator that had finally locked onto its prey's scent. Miles away at the spaceport, a cybernetically augmented assassin named Giannis Wells watched the distant lights of Oak Haven die as the town's power grid was completely cut. He keyed his comms with a cold smile. "The pack has the scent. Flush the target. The princess is to be taken alive. Anyone else? Let the hounds eat." Absolute, suffocating darkness swallowed the greenhouse. The steady, heavy drum of rain against the corrugated roof was the only sound breaking the silence. Chance stood perfectly still in the pitch black, holding the modified plasma cutter in his right hand and a carbon steel machete in his left. He had killed all the internal lights. Victoria was hidden deep in the far corner behind a thick cluster of engineered vines, clutching a pulse pistol with white-knuckled desperation. Click-clack. Click-clack. The sound of heavy claws on the pavement echoed just outside the glass walls. In the wider galaxy, humans were considered an evolutionary anomaly. They didn't have venom, natural armor, or night vision. But what the galaxy completely failed to understand was human endurance, and the terrifying chemical cocktail of adrenaline and pure rage that floods a human brain when a loved one is threatened. Crash. The glass ceiling shattered entirely, and a massive shape dropped into the greenhouse with a heavy, wet thud. Chance didn't wait for his eyes to adjust. He aimed his plasma cutter at the sound and pulled the trigger. A blinding beam of blue-white fire illuminated the nightmare. The hound was easily 8 feet long, built like a starved wolf but entirely hairless, its oily gray skin stretched tight over thick bone plates. Its jaw split completely down the middle, revealing rows of translucent, serrated teeth. The plasma beam hit the beast directly in the shoulder, but its dense bone armor bubbled and resisted the heat. Shrieking a deafening, metallic sound, the hound lunged with impossible speed. Chance threw himself to the right, smashing into a table of seedlings as the creature's jaws snapped shut on empty air with a sound like a steel trap. Before Chance could recover, the hound's heavy, spiked tail whipped through the air, catching him squarely in the ribs. The impact felt like being hit by a speeding hover truck. Chance heard a sickening crack as the air vanished from his lungs, throwing him backward through a wooden support beam. The hound stalked toward him, saliva dripping from its open maw and sizzling on the damp soil. It thought the soft, fleshy human obstacle was broken. But as the beast lunged for his throat, Chance's brain completely overrode his pain receptors with pure, unadulterated human fury. He kicked upward with both boots, stalling the monster's momentum, and rammed the barrel of the plasma cutter directly into the creature's open, fleshy mouth. "Eat this, you ugly bastard," Chance snarled, holding the trigger down until the monster's internal organs completely liquefied from the inside out. Chance shoved the smoking, massive carcass off his chest and dragged himself to his feet. His jacket was shredded, and deep, bloody grooves were carved into his flesh, but the adrenaline held him in a vice grip. Outside, 3 more guttural, metallic howls pierced the storm. The rest of the pack had heard their brother die. "Mom," Chance said, his voice terrifyingly calm as he picked up his machete. "Lock the cellar door behind you. Don't open it for anyone but me. Chance, you cannot face a pack alone. They will tear you apart." A grim, predatory smile touched the corner of Chance's bloody lips. "Let them try. They came here to hunt, but they just stepped into a scrapyard, and I make the rules here." He stepped out of the shattered greenhouse and directly into the pouring rain. 50 yards away, in the center of the settlement's primary harvester yard, a graveyard of massive, rusted terraforming engines, high-voltage cabling, and towering silos of compressed atmospheric gas, 3 pairs of glowing red optics materialized from the tree line. The remaining hounds fanned out, analyzing the bleeding, fragile human. To them, he was already dead. The hound on the far right charged, tearing up huge chunks of mud. Chance didn't swing his blade, he waited until the last possible microsecond to sidestep the beast. As the hound overextended and slipped in the deep mud, Chance drove his heavy work boot down onto its spiked tail, pinning it for a fraction of a second. With his free hand, he yanked a thick, exposed black rubber cable out of the mud, a cable connected directly to the primary 4,000-volt capacitor of a stripped-down industrial harvester engine. With a savage grunt, Chance jammed the raw, sparking copper wiring directly into the unarmored tissue inside the hound's open mouth and hit the remote release switch on his belt. 4,000 volts of unshielded current surged through the beast. Its red optics flashed blindingly white as its muscles locked so violently that its own bones snapped under the tension, cooking it from the inside out. 2 down. 2 left. Enraged, the remaining 2 hounds abandoned all caution and charged simultaneously. Chance dropped the wire and sprinted directly into the maze of pressurized gas silos, leading them into a trap that would completely shatter the assassin's calculations. Chance sprinted through the maze of silos, his broken ribs radiating hot lances of agony. The beasts were gaining fast, their heavy claws tearing up the earth just inches from his heels. He ducked under a rusted steel gantry and slid around the base of a massive pressurized silo. The leading hound took the corner entirely too fast, its claws screeching uselessly against the steel hull as it tried to break. Chance was already waiting, bracing his back against a support strut and holding the heavy carbon steel machete like a baseball bat. He put every ounce of his high-gravity muscle into a brutal swing, aiming perfectly for the narrow, exposed joint between the monster's neck and its shoulder armor. The blade bit incredibly deep, shearing through muscle and severing primary arteries. Black blood erupted over Chance's face as the hound crashed into the mud, violently thrashing in its own death throes. But before Chance could recover his balance, the 4th and final hound rammed him with the force of a freight train. Chance flew backward, crashing brutally into a wooden tool shed and landing on a pile of sharp, rusted scrap iron. The impact knocked the remaining air from his lungs, and his vision went completely black. The final hound stalked slowly through the splinters, sensing the human's motor functions failing. It opened its massive jaws over his face, preparing to rip his throat out. Chance couldn't reach his weapons. But his bleeding hand blindly brushed against a cold iron lever in the scrap beneath him, the manual release valve for a heavy 3-ton magnetic crane engine block hovering directly above them. As the hound lunged, Chance violently pulled the lever. With a deafening hiss of compressed air, the 3-ton solid steel block plummeted from the sky, hitting the hound squarely in the back with a wet, explosive crunch that drove the creature straight into the mud. Silence descended on the yard. Chance lay in the dirt, breathing raggedly, covered in a mixture of rain, mud, and alien gore. He had successfully cleared the pack. But as he dragged his broken body back toward the greenhouse, a tall silhouette clad in a dark, armored coat stepped through the ruined glass frame. It was Giannis Wells, the elite Imperial assassin. He held a heavy kinetic slug thrower in one hand and a humming monomolecular vibroblade in the other. He looked down at Chance, who was slouched on a fertilizer crate, holding nothing but a rusted pipe wrench. I have to admit, I expected a small army, Giannis sneered, his cybernetic eye glowing crimson. You fought like a cornered rat, kid, but you're bleeding out. Tell me where the princess is, and I'll make your death quick. Chance didn't look at the gun. He just spat a mouthful of blood and offered a defiant, bloody grin. You're a hunter, right? Rule number 1 of hunting, make sure you actually know what you're tracking. You thought you tracked a deposed royal. But you cornered a mother, and you just stepped into her son's backyard. With his hidden left hand, Chance slammed down the main override switch for the greenhouse's industrial irrigation system. But it didn't spray water. It blasted a highly volatile, atomized mist of ammonium nitrate and synthetic phosphorus fertilizer into the air. Chance hurled a burning emergency flare straight into the chemical cloud and dove into an irrigation trench as the entire greenhouse violently detonated into a raging chemical inferno. Giannis walked out of the flames, his armor scorched and half his face burned away to reveal gleaming chrome implants. Enraged, he drew his humming vibroblade to finish the boy. But Chance had one final trick as a mechanic. He smashed his pipe wrench into a high-pressure line behind him, unleashing a geyser of supercooled liquid nitrogen directly into the assassin's face. The extreme thermal shock instantly flash-froze and cracked Giannis's cybernetic implants and facial structure. Blinded and screaming, the assassin swung wildly. Chance stepped into his guard, grabbed the dropped humming vibroblade, and drove it straight upward under the assassin's chin, ending his life permanently. When Victoria finally broke through the cellar doors, she found the entire elite hunting unit completely dismantled by a single, unaugmented human boy. As she cradled her stubborn, unconscious son in the rain, a profound, chilling realization washed over her: she hadn't just raised a son. She had inadvertently forged the most terrifying predator the galaxy had ever seen. And as they prepared to board the assassin's stolen starship to take back her empire, she knew the usurpers on her throne had absolutely no idea what kind of human nightmare was coming for them.